The period following the American Civil War witnessed profound constitutional transformations through the adoption of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, collectively known as the Reconstruction Amendments. These provisions addressed the abolition of slavery, the definition of citizenship, and the protection of voting rights, reshaping the legal framework of the United States in response to the conflict's outcome. The 13th Amendment permanently ended slavery and involuntary servitude except as punishment for crime, granting Congress enforcement authority. Proposed by Congress in 1864 and early 1865 and ratified on December 6, 1865, it built upon wartime measures while establishing nationwide permanence. The 14th Amendment defined citizenship by birth or naturalization, prohibited states from abridging privileges or immunities, and ensured due process and equal protection, with additional sections addressing apportionment, disqualification of former insurrectionists, debt validity, and enforcement power. Proposed in June 1866 and ratified on July 9, 1868, it overturned prior judicial precedents and imposed conditions on Southern readmission. The 15th Amendment prohibited denial of voting rights on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, with Congress empowered to enforce it. Proposed in February 1869 and ratified on February 3, 1870, it completed the triad by focusing on male suffrage irrespective of race. The procedural pathway for these amendments adhered strictly to Article 5 of the Constitution, requiring two-thirds approval in both houses of Congress for proposal and ratification by three-fourths of the states through legislatures or conventions. No presidential signature was required, and certification followed successful ratification by the appropriate number of states. The timeline spanned the pre-war era of entrenched slavery and sectional tension, the Civil War years from 1861 to 1865 marked by emancipation initiatives and military conflict, and the post-war Reconstruction phase extending into the 1870s. Southern states faced military oversight and ratification requirements as prerequisites for full reintegration. These changes occurred amid broader societal shifts, including the participation of diverse groups in the war effort and the emergence of political factions advocating for expanded rights and federal authority. Exploration of the era reveals the involvement of Jewish Americans in both the Confederate and Union spheres, alongside economic mechanisms that sustained the Northern war effort and religious accommodations that advanced equality. Jewish officials held notable positions in the Confederacy, while Union contributions centered on military service, domestic advocacy, and limited diplomatic activity. Military chaplaincy reforms addressed religious liberty for Jewish soldiers, and Union financing relied on innovative banking strategies and bond sales. The Radical Republicans drove much of the constitutional agenda through moral conviction, partisan strategy, and recognition of political and demographic opportunities. Their networks encompassed diverse religious communities, including Christian reform circles and Jewish representatives, shaping understandings of justice and power in the post-war order. These elements collectively illustrate the multifaceted dynamics of Reconstruction, where constitutional reform intersected with individual contributions, economic imperatives, and political calculations. The Reconstruction Amendments, texts, procedures, and timelines. The 13th Amendment declared that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for duly convicted crime, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to its jurisdiction, with Congress granted power to enforce the article by appropriate legislation. Proposed through congressional votes in 1864 and January 1865, it achieved ratification on December 6, 1865, when Georgia provided the necessary 27th state approval and received certification on December 18, 1865. This measure extended wartime emancipation policies into permanent constitutional law, addressing the institution of slavery that had divided the nation prior to 1861. During the Civil War, the amendment gained traction as Union forces advanced, reflecting the conflict's evolution toward total abolition. Post-war ratification occurred amid the transition from military hostilities to Reconstruction governance. The 14th Amendment established that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to its jurisdiction are citizens of the United States and the state in which they reside, barring states from abridging privileges or immunities, depriving life, liberty, or property without due process, or denying equal protection. Additional provisions covered apportionment of representation, disqualification of insurrectionists from office, validity of public debt, and congressional enforcement authority. Proposed in June 1866, it secured ratification on July 9, 1868, with certification following on July 28, 1868. Southern states ratified under pressure as a condition for readmission, integrating the amendment into the framework of restored Union relations. The pre-war context of judicial decisions denying citizenship to certain populations informed its drafting, while Civil War outcomes necessitated its adoption to secure freed people's status. The 15th Amendment stated that the right of citizens to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, with Congress empowered to enforce the provision. Proposed in February 1869, it attained ratification on February 3, 1870, and certification on March 30, 1870. This amendment protected male suffrage across racial lines in the post-war environment of Southern resistance and black codes. The overall Article 5 process ensured each amendment's validity once the required state thresholds were met, with late ratifications or rescissions not invalidating certification. These timelines connected the pre-Civil War legacy of slavery, the war years of emancipation and conflict, and the post-war era of constitutional entrenchment, forming the legal backbone of Reconstruction. Jewish officials in the Confederate government. Judah Philip Benjamin, born in 1811 to a Sephardic Jewish family in the British West Indies, emerged as the most prominent Jewish official in the Confederate government. A successful lawyer, plantation owner, and former U.S. Senator from Louisiana, he served as the first Jewish cabinet member in Confederate history, holding the positions of Attorney General from February 1861 to November 1861, Secretary of War briefly from September 1861 to March 1862, and Secretary of State from March 1862 until the war's end in 1865. Known as the brains of the Confederacy for his advisory role to President Jefferson Davis, he focused on diplomacy, intelligence, and efforts to secure recognition from Britain and France. He escaped to England after the Confederate defeat, pursuing a second career as a barrister and dying in Paris in 1884. Benjamin was never the vice president, a position held by Alexander H. Stephens. David Levy Yulee, born David Levy, served as the first Jew elected to the U.S. Senate from Florida and acted as a strong secessionist who helped lead Florida out of the Union. A vocal supporter of the Confederacy without a formal cabinet post, he participated in Confederate congressional activities and maintained ties to Confederate leadership. Abraham C. Myers held the role of Confederate Quartermaster General, the highest-ranking supply and logistics officer for the entire Army, managing procurement and distribution from 1861 onward amid challenges that drew criticism. Edwin de Leon served as a Confederate diplomat and propagandist, appointed as a special agent in Europe to seek recognition and support from Britain and France. Henry M. Hyams, cousin of Judah P. Benjamin, served as lieutenant governor of Louisiana during the early Confederate period. Jewish participation in the Confederacy remained small overall, with estimates of 2,000 to 3,000 Jews serving in Confederate forces out of hundreds of thousands of troops. Government roles were limited beyond these prominent figures, reflecting the modest Southern Jewish population of roughly 20,000 to 25,000. These individuals integrated into Southern society, with some owning plantations or supporting secessionist causes in line with regional loyalties. Their contributions highlighted the diversity within Confederate leadership and military structures while underscoring the constrained scale of Jewish involvement at the highest levels. Jewish participation in the Union military, diplomacy, and advocacy. No Jews served in President Lincoln's cabinet or as top civilian officials in the Union government. Jewish contributions on the Union side concentrated in the military, where officers attained general rank and soldiers numbered roughly 7,000 to 10,000. Frederick Neffler rose to Major General and commanded under Sherman during the March to the Sea. Frederick Salomon achieved Major General rank in Western theater campaigns, while his brother Edward S. Salomon served as Brigadier General. Henry Moses Judah attained Brigadier General, appointed directly by Lincoln. Leopold Blumenberg reached Brevet Brigadier General and served as Provost Marshal. Estimates placed around 6 to 7 Jewish generals overall, many through brevet promotions. Leonard Myers served as U.S. Congressman from Pennsylvania and advocated for Jewish rights, including chaplaincy laws. Phineas Horowitz held a high naval medical role as Surgeon General of the Navy. Simon Wolfe acted as a prominent lawyer and community leader in Washington, D.C., advocating domestically for Jewish soldiers' rights, pensions, and broader causes without overseas diplomatic duties. Union diplomatic posts in Europe remained under non-Jewish appointees led by Secretary of State William H. Seward, with no high-profile Jewish special agents or envoys dispatched to Britain or France. The asymmetry contrasted with Confederate diplomatic efforts involving figures like Edwin de Leon. Jewish soldiers received the Medal of Honor, and advocacy efforts focused on home front support and documentation of service. These contributions reflected regional loyalties and integration into Northern society, with Jewish Americans participating proportionally to their population while achieving notable military distinctions. Domestic advocacy complemented battlefield service, addressing specific religious accommodations without extending to cabinet or European diplomatic prominence. The overall Union Jewish effort emphasized military and community roles rather than centralized governmental or international influence. Military chaplaincy reforms and Union war financing. Military chaplaincy involved ordained religious leaders providing spiritual, moral, and emotional support to troops through services, counseling, morale building, and ethical guidance. Chaplains served as non-combatants accompanying units. At the Civil War's outset, U.S. Army law restricted chaplains to regularly ordained ministers of some Christian denomination, excluding Jews. With thousands of Jewish soldiers in the Union Army, Rabbi Arnold Fischel met with President Lincoln in December 1861 to protest the restriction. Lincoln supported revision, and Congress amended the law on July 17, 1862, to read regularly ordained minister of some religious denomination. Lincoln appointed Rabbi Jacob Frankel as the first official Jewish chaplain in September 1862, with approximately 13 Jewish chaplains serving overall. Simon Wolfe contributed to broader advocacy for Jewish soldiers, including pensions and service documentation. The United States lacked a permanent central bank after President Andrew Jackson ended the Second Bank of the United States. The Union raised over $3 billion through war bonds marketed by J. Cook, greenbacks issued as fiat currency, new taxes including income tax, and bank loans. Cook, known as the financier of the Civil War, sold the 520 and 730 bonds through thousands of agents appealing to ordinary citizens. The National Banking Act of 1863 created federally chartered national banks required to hold U.S. bonds in exchange for issuing uniform national banknotes, aiding bond sales and currency stability without establishing a single central institution. Auguste Belmont, the Rothschild family agent and a German Jewish immigrant, supported Union bond sales and discouraged Confederate recognition in Europe. The Seligman family assisted in securities sales and army supplies. The Rothschilds remained largely neutral, avoiding major loans to either side, while the Bank of England stayed neutral with no official lending. These financial mechanisms sustained the Union effort through domestic innovation and selective international engagement. Chaplaincy reforms advanced religious liberty as part of wartime equity, paralleling the economic strategies that enabled military success. Together, they formed essential supports for the Northern cause without centralized control or foreign dominance. The Radical Republicans, leadership, involvement, and motivations. The Radical Republicans constituted a faction within the Republican Party advocating immediate abolition, full civil and political rights for African Americans, and strict conditions for Southern readmission. Leaders included Thaddeus Stevens in the House and Charles Sumner in the Senate, alongside Benjamin Wade and Henry Winter Davis. They formed the Joint Committee on the Conduct of the War and pushed the Wade-Davis bill during the conflict. Post-war, they dominated Congress, passing the Reconstruction Acts and making ratification of the 14th Amendment a condition for Southern states. They provided essential support for all three Reconstruction Amendments through congressional majorities and enforcement mechanisms. Their motivations encompassed moral superiority derived from abolitionist principles and social justice commitments of the era, viewing themselves as fulfilling higher ethical standards against the slave power. Partisan advantage played a central role, as enfranchising black voters in the South secured Republican majorities while Northern laws limited demographic shifts northward. Deeper self-interest involved political power consolidation and financial benefits through altered Southern demographics, with black voters counterbalancing white Southern influence. They maintained Northern dominance by engineering Southern voting patterns, recognizing the potential of migration but prioritizing immediate power gains. Networks within diverse Christian reform groups and Jewish representatives interacted with radical Republicans, influencing decisions through religious advocacy and community ties. Jewish leaders engaged on issues of equality and rights, contributing to understandings of justice that informed radical policies. These connections extended beyond abolition to broader aspirations encompassing demographic reconfiguration for sustained authority. The factions approach reflected multidimensional strategies where moral rhetoric aligned with practical power calculations and religious alliances, driving the constitutional changes that defined Reconstruction. In conclusion, this piece is written neutrally for a broad audience following mainstream historical interpretations, allowing readers to read between the lines and draw their own conclusions. The Reconstruction Amendments established enduring constitutional principles that abolished slavery, defined citizenship, and protected suffrage, enacted through precise procedural steps amid the transition from war to peace. Jewish participation on both sides of the Civil War illustrated individual agency within divided loyalties, from Confederate cabinet service to Union military distinction and domestic reform. Chaplaincy advancements and innovative financing underscored commitments to religious liberty and economic mobilization that sustained the Union victory. Radical Republicans shaped the era through leadership that combined moral conviction with strategic self-interest, leveraging networks across religious communities to advance their vision. Their recognition of demographic and political opportunities informed policies that altered Southern dynamics while preserving Northern influence. These elements converged in a post-war order where constitutional reform, diverse contributions, and factional motivations produced lasting institutional changes. The interplay of these factors reveals the complexity of Reconstruction as a period of profound legal, social, and economic realignment. Jewish figures, chaplaincy reforms, financing strategies, and radical leadership each contributed distinct dimensions to the era's developments. The resulting framework reflected deliberate choices that balanced ideological goals with practical considerations of power and inclusion, setting the course for subsequent national evolution.